So thank you very, very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be able to do this. And I myself personally, and from Rod Cullerton, thank you for being interested enough to come along and find out the direction that politicians that we have elected to represent us are the very people who have cancelled every title deed in Australia. And at the end of the information, I have them all on a slide, each one who physically terminated your title deeds. And they did this not only outside of the parliamentary structure, they also did it outside of the Constitution, because there is no power in the Australian Constitution for a corporation to hold the information of your property. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more tonight about, that's the Australian Constitution. It is 1,006 pages. It took me 3 weeks not to read it, just to go through it and make up an index of every note that is in this document. The Constitution started being developed in 1883, and they worked on the actual production of the Constitution right up to and including 1900. So 17 years. And when you think about it, that the colonies were all separate. So there was Moreton Bay, Botany Bay, Melbourne, I'm not sure, here in South Australia and Western Australia. And sometimes there would be almost a year between the meetings that they had. So what is in this document, and when I finish talking on the Constitution, I'll pass it round and have a look in it. It's a little bit moth-eaten, and it's got lots of tags in it, because this was with me in Canberra. This was what I went to if I wanted some information on the Constitution. It was ironic, it was 1999, and I was the first senator that actually took, not this laptop, but a laptop into the Senate chamber and actually took emails live to actually ask questions of the ministers. They didn't like it. Anyhow, so I had the laptop and my Constitution, but if I walked in with my Bible, they knew they had upset me. But the interesting thing was, I used to get heckled like you would not believe. But the moment I stood to read something out of the Bible, when they were passing a bill that was contrary to God's law, it was just dead silence. So that's the power. Anyhow, okay, so what I want to talk to you tonight about is actually this section of the Constitution, And later on, up on the table up there, there's 3 copies of the petition that Rod and I are going to take to the House of Commons in England. And the reason we're doing that, I'll explain. It goes right back to the Magna Carta in 1215. England actually had a civil war from 1205 to 1215. The previous king, King Richard, was in the Holy Land chasing the Muslims out of Jerusalem. Back in that era, the barons who held large parcels of land in England all had standing armies, their own personal armies. King Richard asked them if they would contribute some of their army to augment his to go to the Holy Land. So they did. And as a reward for that, King Richard actually granted the barons parcels of land in proportion to however many men they contributed. So they were successful. Unfortunately, King Richard, on his way back from the Holy Land, was captured. And for 10 years, the English people had to pay ransom to his captors over 10 years. So by the time he got out of that and was heading back to England, he didn't have much beer money. So he was raiding castles to get, some wealth back, and got shot through the eye with an arrow. So that meant then that his younger brother, John, and we all know about King John and Robin Hood, that's the era. That really did occur. So King John actually started revoking the land grants that Richard had given to the barons. Now the barons generally were busy fighting one another to protect their little patch, and so they decided to get their act together, and in 1205 started a war against King John, which culminated in early 1215 with them actually capturing the Tower of London. Any of you been to England and been to the Tower of London? Yeah, there's a few nod. Yes, okay. See, there was no Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, right? The sovereign of the day actually lived in the Tower of London. There's multiple towers, actually, that make up the Tower of London. So, obviously, the Magna Carta was prepared. You don't write a document like that before morning tea. So, the option was given to John, either sign the actual Magna Carta, which means Great Charter. Right? His options were to sign it, or they were going to take his head off. Now he did on two latter times actually revoked signing it, but it still stands today. So prior to John signing the Magna Carta, the sovereign had absolute sovereignty. I'm going to put that down for a minute. The sovereign had what is called absolute sovereignty. Whatever the sovereign said, went. What the Magna Carta did, it took that entire sovereignty off the sovereign, left the sovereign with only one power, and that was the ability to withhold a bill coming through the Parliament if the sovereign thought that wasn't in the best interests of the English people. That, well, used to stand until 1986, when they brought in the Australia Act. So, the sovereignty that was the power of the sovereign up until then was transferred to the House of Commons. So anyone got any idea why it went there? Why not the House of Lords?
They're the robber barons.
No, the barons are actually in the House of Lords. No, it's the people's house.
Yeah, the people.
Yes.
For the people, yeah.
So that put the power, the absolute power, back in the hands of the people. And when, like we did in 2011 and 12, or prior to that, right around Australia, we all elected every premier that there is in every state. So we had King John taking the land off the people, and that's exactly what was behind the Magna Carta. And actually there is a section in the Magna Carta that actually gave 25 barons the right of veto over any decision that John or any subsequent sovereign has made. Not really known, but it is there. And when you put 25 of the land barons, and you put 25 of the bishops of all the cathedrals in England, there's 50 of them actually, then you actually have the Privy Council. And that's why later on I'll explain we have a plan A, and B, and C. So coming back to this section of the Constitution, it's actually the empowering act that was passed in the House of Commons in 1900, on the 9th of July 1900, that actually brought our Constitution into existence. Now, go back to before then, in the mid-1800s, and I'll use Queensland as an example. Queen Victoria actually proclaimed Queensland into existence. But 1856 is a long way after 1215. So how was Queen Victoria able to divide the state of New South Wales into two? Very simple. Each of the colonies, all 5 of them, all had a single legislative council. So New South Wales passed a bill, and at that stage, and that goes right up until 1931, any bills that were passed by any of the colonies all had to be taken to London, brought into the House of Commons, and then passed into an act, but it also had to have, with the consent of the Lords Spiritual and the Lords Temporal. So when Queen Victoria proclaimed Queensland into existence, the wording was I, Victoria, with a bill from the colony, debated and amended in the House of Commons with the consent of the Lord Spiritual and the Lord's Temporal, I proclaim. So that's the power process. And this is exactly why the petition that we're taking to the House of Commons, asking for the Governor-General's position, like even the House of Commons can't sack the Governor because the Governor is appointed by the Sovereign, or should be. It isn't now. It's actually appointed by the Premier of the state. And I'll tell you something ludicrous in a few minutes. I said ludicrous, not lewd. And I've lost my train of thought. Shouldn't tell stories in the middle. So that was how the actual constitution came into existence. So Rod and I are following a very similar process. We're setting out to get 100,000 signatures on that petition. Yeah, it's going to take us a while. There's only 2 of us. Well, no, there's not only 2 of us now. There's lots of people out there with copies of the petition. Right. The reason we are aiming at getting 100,000 is the English Petition Act actually states that if a petition is presented to the House of Commons with 40,000 signatures, it has to be acknowledged. Doesn't have to go anywhere else, but it must be acknowledged by the House of Commons. If a signature with 100 or in excess of 100,000 signatures is presented in the House of Commons, it has to be debated on the floor. Right? So we're immediately inside the process where we want to be. Rod in 2019 came up before the grand jury, and the grand jury is 25 of the Lord's Spiritual, 25 of the Lord's Temporal. And he asked a series of questions relating to what Whitlam did in actually removing the word Commonwealth from all legislation. Where did he get the power from that? The interesting thing is, in this document, there's a section called Section 51. And within Section 51 is very, very well articulated the powers that the House of Representatives and the Senate have. And it also, and I'll find it for you afterwards, I suppose I can find it now. You can tell because that just fell open. Where I've got that yellow highlight, now that is page 346 when you're looking for it later on. And just to get it absolutely correct, right? The way the Constitution works, I'll just duck back to, so that's the actual clause of the Constitution, and it's Section 5, which happens to be in the English section of the Act. Section 128, currently the last section of the Constitution, is the referendum constitution. Right? So in each one it says this act, and believe it or not, I can even read it, there's a little 22 there. So if you want to know what the note 22 tells you, right, it tells you about the act. Then and all laws, which is 23. So that's where we were just before. Come on, flip open. No? Goodness me. You did it before, and all laws. No, laws of any state. Where are you? Show yourself. Okay, so, and all laws has the note 33. Right, and I'll read the start of it because this is really important. No difficulty is suggested by the words, and all laws, made by the Parliament of the Commonwealth under the Constitution. The words under the Constitution are words of limitation and qualification. I'll just read it again. No difficulty is suggested by the words and all laws made by the Parliament of the Commonwealth under the Constitution. The words under the Constitution are words of limitation and qualification. So the Parliament can't say, oh, I think the section 5 of the Constitution just gives us the power to do anything. No, it does not. The Parliament is restricted to be able to only pass laws that are expressly set out. And in the same section, or same note that I'm reading, a law in excess of authority conferred by the Constitution is no law. It's wholly void and inoperable. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. It affords no protection. So I can think of a few laws that the Parliament have passed, like Mr. Whitlam taking the word Constitution. Where does he get out of Section 5 of the English Act the power to take the word out of every piece of legislation that's ever been passed? Particularly when you read that first part that I read to you before, the words under the Constitution are words of limitation and qualification. And they can't take a word out of one section. It goes on, to be valid and binding, they must be within the domain of jurisdiction mapped out and delimited in expressed terms. So it's what's called black and white law. The Parliament can't say, oh, well, I think that says this. Sorry. Immediately, that law is void. So, and that's another part of what we're doing with the petition. We're not going to the House of Commons asking to change the Constitution. Where are you? 262. We're not asking the Parliament to change any of this.
No.
We're asking them to rectify the abuse that has been made to Section 2, and Section 2 says very, very clearly, the provision of this Act referring to the Queen shall extend to Her Majesty's heirs and successors in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. Where did they get the Queen of Australia? Out of Section 2,
Yeah, made up.
right? They come up. And then down in 5, this Act, and all acts made by the Parliament of the Commonwealth under the Constitution. So Whitlam takes Commonwealth out of the Act, right? Shall be binding on the courts, judges and people of every state and every part of the Commonwealth. So that's the reason why we're going to England, to the House of Commons, not to ask them to fix anything in here, but mind you, it needs some fixing. We're asking them to rectify what has been done to their Act. Because up the top here, the Constitution of Australia, Constitutional Act 63 and 64 Vic, which is referring to Queen Victoria. Okay, so that is, that first 9 sections in this Constitution is actually the Empowering Act. It's part of our Constitution. So I better get on to what I'm supposed to be talking about tonight. Can we fire up?
Yeah, yep, just.
Yeah. Come on.
Because I've talked about the point, so you want to just need
No, just two.
two USBs?
Yeah.